Dr. Dave Brat, welcome to Constituting America's Constitutional Chats podcast. We're going to ask you to begin with a few opening comments on our topic today, which is how a bill becomes a law and how it starts with we the people, and then we'll go to questions.
Great. Well, thank you, Kathy Gillespie, and your husband, of course, good friends over the years. And I'm glad to see you're doing this important work. This is just great. I love talking to young people. Spent my whole life talking to young people. I'm older than I look. I got my hair cut yesterday. I got a lot of gray hair flopping off onto that floor. But let me just get right at it. I was a congressman for 4 years. I'll give you kind of the ideal case. And then in Q&A, you can ask me how it really works or whatever. But how does a bill become a law? How do you get a bill in the first place? That's where you come in. And I'm going to emphasize your generation as an example here, right? So the first thing is you got to come up with some good ideas, but you really got to think them through, right? And then there's the process. And it is political in the best sense of the word and in the worst sense of the word, right? You can introduce it through a member of Congress or a member of the Senate, but it has to be, that's Article 1. And Kathy mentioned we the people, and that's the guts. That is the backbone of our system. Our system is supposed to be of the people, by the people, for the people. And that's where you come in. You have to come up with good ideas, but you need more than ideas. You're going to have a list of probably 1,000 friends on board if you want to make your idea at least have a chance, right? So you got to get in touch with your congressperson, and then you write it down. And then when you're writing down the law, the congressman, I had about 7 people on my staff. So I had about 3 policy people, and then they will work with you to craft the language for the bill. And then roughly speaking, it goes to committee, right? So I was on the education committee and the small business committee and the education committee. And then you could share your ideas with your colleagues and, try to improve it. But you really got to think things through in those stages because of unintended consequences. And I was an economist, so I was just kind of naive, right? I thought, well, you just do the best policy. But when you get up to DC, you find even if you win 51% of the vote, or, in committee, you win the majority of the votes to get a bill passed, you may have 49% of the people really mad at you, even if it's the right thing to do. Because you're putting this into law, right? So then it goes through the House, through committee, and then it goes up to the House itself, and you have a vote, and then it's got to go over to the other body, to the Senate. And I'm going over these kind of quickly because they don't matter that much, right? A lot of these bills will just pass kind of, through committee, through the House, get to Senate, have a debate. And then it just depends whether it hits a roadblock or not, right? Whether somebody raises a red flag. A lot of bills just go through if they're just boring, like renaming a post office. But if it's controversial, if it involves money, big chunks of money, boy, then you got your hands full. And so I just want to, at this point, point out one case study. You young people, go look at the Board of Trustees reports on Social Security and on Medicare, right? Your healthcare, retirement plans, et cetera. They are insolvent in a matter of 12 years. Insolvent is not a good thing. They run out of money. Also, we have $36 trillion in debt right now in the Congressional Budget Office. You can go Google them. They're adding another 20 trillion over the next 10 years. So your generation will be 56 trillion in debt. So I urge you to get involved in the political process because you're being outmanned. Right? You got a bunch of us old people spending your money, right? We're spending the money right now. We're borrowing from you, and you're going to pay it back with interest. The interest payment this year is $1 trillion. The interest payment on the debt is bigger than the national defense budget. And so you ought to get involved in this process. Get with your congressmen and congresswomen and senators. They love meeting with young people. You got a real advantage. It's like meet with a CEO, right? When you go into a CEO, as a student, they're going to go, isn't that a cute kid? And you will have a huge advantage. When you're the first year worker in a firm, you'll be lucky if you can get their time of day. So take advantage of your age, go in there, be positive, tell them I got to save these programs for my generation. And if you do that, you can make a career out of that as well. Right. And so bottom line, You get your congressperson to write up a bill for you. It goes all the way through. You put it in the hopper through your committee, or you can walk up to the dais right up where the Speaker of the House sits. And there is literally a hopper up there, and you can put your bill in there. And then it'll go over to the Senate, and then it goes up to the president. The president can veto it, say no to it. He's Article 2 in the Constitution, and the judiciary, the courts, are Article 3. And so that is roughly the process. And I just wanted to throw in a little self-interest for you because you're going to be competing against corporations, nonprofits, tons of other groups that have special interests. And I hate to tell you, a lot of it just has to do with power, right? And so you've got to have a big enough power base, which you do. The number of young people, you have a big enough power base to make things happen. And so I encourage you to stick up. What you're doing is ethical, right? It's always important to do what's ethical as well. It's the right thing to do. And if you have that on your side, as well as a large number of young people on board with signatures, you'll do well. So Kathy, that's my intro. And you guys ask me anything you want. I'm happy to answer.
Well, thank you. And again, we're just so honored to have you with us today. And I know Janine has got a lot of questions. So Janine, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great.
All right. Well, Congressman Brat, I appreciate your enthusiasm, and I agree with you in regard to this $1 trillion in interest alone on the debt. Yep. And it's just time that we do something about that. Okay. Yep. So we go into schools all over the country at Constituting America through our George Washington Speaking Initiative. And I've given over 600 speeches. Kathy's given us hundreds as well. And one of the things we do is we try to meet the kids where they are and say, think about something that you would like to change in your neighborhood, whether they're 5th grade, middle school, high school. And we know we're really talking to them about national interest with the Constitution, but we kind of correlate it with their local, because that's what's affecting them, and they'll say things like, more street lights, get the dogs on the leashes, too much trash, I want a park, I want a rec center, things of that nature. So we teach them to write a petition. And then how to use their First Amendment rights as their toolbox. And then you use a petition, then you use your speech, and then you call the press, and then you plan your assembly. A lot of people plan the assembly first, and they don't really know what they want. And then you call your local congressman or congresswoman. And so I was really intrigued by your comment that we teach them how to find their local congressperson, and then also that they can call them, they can go to DC and see them, but they can't go see the president. Everybody thinks the president. More people show up to vote for the president. They don't realize that their legislative branch is really, really closest to the people. Yep. So I was intrigued by something you said, that if you call your representative, the staff will help you. I wrote it down. The staff will help you craft it. So talk to me a little bit more about that, please.
Sure. And for the young people listening, if you make it to DC, it's easy. There's 3 buildings where all the Congress members are. There's 3 buildings where all the senators are. So they're easy to find. You probably won't get your representative on a random day. But at home, they also I had 3 or 4 district-wide offices with my staff in each office throughout the week. So you can reach out to your congressman or woman through their district offices, and then they will help you. If to be serious, you're going to have to come with some firepower to get their attention, right? If constituents call in a large number or write letters in a large number, like a few hundred, you will get your representative's attention. If it's just you, they'll think, I'm going to do a good deed and I'm going to go out and talk to this young person, but it won't move on to the next stage, right? But if you've got, some parents backing you and some other senior folks, maybe from, some group you're part of, or your church or your synagogue, et cetera, behind you, trying to do something important, any congressman staff will help you draft language for your bill, or they may be efficient and help you attach your language to another bill that's already going through. So that's another way to look at it, right? You can attach your language to other bills, to budget bills, and that gets real complex, but that's what they're there for. They're very smart young people up there. in their 20s and early 30s as policy legislative assistants, they're called. And they'll help you from soup to nuts.
What if your representative doesn't answer the phone? What if nobody answers the phone? I know there's a lot of frustration with that. Shouldn't somebody always answer the phone? Usually, do you really get back to
Yeah.
people if they the message?
Oh, yeah. No, that's bad. If your member is not answering the phone or in touch, you might consider running against them in a few years when you get to the right age, right? That's called
I always say.
non-responsive. Yeah, and if
That's
all you get is form letters, that's another hint. But you do have to be serious and let them know, I got 1,000 people across multiple schools interested in my idea here. And all of a sudden they'll wake up out of self-interest.
Yeah. Let me build off of that. Okay. You
Yep.
said like 200 to 300. It
Yep.
would be interesting, when we teach the kids, and this is even for like adults too. Let's say an adult
Sure.
wants to
Yes,
do something.
yes.
It's good for all of us to know the mechanisms of how it works. So is it 200 to 300 people maybe with a signature on a petition, or is it 1,000? I mean, what do you think is the bar to really start getting attention?
Oh, a few hundred will get their attention. If you get up into the 1,000 or more, then they know you're organized as well, right? You can get a few hundred on your own. You start getting over 1,000, that means you got a coordinated project in the works. And then your young people have a skill us old people don't. It's called web savvy. Take advantage, right? You go make something go viral, and you'll be in the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. You hit that, you'll be on your local TV with an issue that you believe in. And believe me, your congressman or woman will be racing to see you.
That's so funny because that's what I always teach the kids. I always say,
good.
Call the press. If you call the press and you get an
Yep.
article, then you have more people, and
Yep.
then plan your assembly, and then call your representative, and
Yep.
he's going to say, "Wow," or she, you have a assembly, you have the press, you have an article. Wow, okay, I better pay attention. All right, so that's really great to know. And then let's talk for all of us, people that are outside the beltway, so to speak.
Yep.
So you get an idea from a constituent, which for those that are young that don't know what that means, it means a citizen that lives in your district,
right,
that you represent. And so that constituent has an idea, and you have 1,000, and you're intrigued now, and you say, okay, I'm going to represent you and go take this to DC. What happens next? I mean, you have this idea. Let's say they want a rec center or something, right? You're taking, a national. It needs to be on a national level, but let's just take that. So you go back. What happens the day you get back in DC? And walk us very slowly. I mean, does it have to go in the hopper, so to speak? I mean, what's next?
No. What's next? And I'm going to be truthful here, right? So I had 800,000 constituents. So if someone's there face to face, congressmen don't like saying no, right? So if you get a stupid idea or just something that's well-intentioned or utopian or just won't work, the congressmen will usually be like, yeah, that's a good idea. And but they won't do anything with it. So it dies by atrophy, by lack of attention, right? So that's where it's also good to do a little bit of analysis. If you're, there's few very real, original new ideas, right? Hopefully you have an idea which addresses a significant problem that needs to be fixed, that's shared by a lot of people. And the politician will say, okay, I think you're onto something here, right? And then they got to weigh, is this good for me? Is it good for my party? Can it pass? Does it need money? Can I get the money? And but the first thing is if they want to jump on it, they'll give it over to their legislative assistant and they'll start drafting language.
For a bill.
Right. Yes. For a bill. Right.
Right.
Right. Or they can attach, like corporations, a lot of times in a budget bill, a corporation will add one line that makes them a monopoly, which is, as an economist, we don't like monopolies. We want a lot of people competing because then you get better products. But if you get one line in there that, hey, you're the only firm that's allowed to sell this in the state of XYZ, you can add that to a budget bill and you're a monopoly. right? Just as an example. So you can add an idea onto existing legislation, or you can come up with your whole new unique bill. But they'll usually just do whatever's easier to get passed.
Okay, well, I want to walk through a couple of stages with you very quickly before I have to toss it to my comrades here. But
Sure.
before I do that, can you like in 15 seconds or less tell me a bill that was superfluous and atrophied and a bill that made sense that you did champion?
Yeah, well, you get people with well-intentioned ideas or conspiracy theories, and you'll get someone that comes up to you and say, Dave, I think the Russians are out, in our state, and they're at my house, and I want you to write a bill to stop the Russians. And that's a hot issue in the press, but if they're just talking about Russians at their house, then that's probably not going to get any action. On the other hand, if you've got something in the press right now, like I was on education committee, I was big on student literacy. I put in bills on literacy in the city of Chicago. The poor kids can only read at the 12%. 12% can read. 12% literacy rate. 88% illiteracy rate among the poor third graders in Chicago. So I would put in bills to pay more attention to that issue, to try and get third grade reading, because if you can't read in third grade, you just get passed on for all the rest of the grades. And so those kind of issues, your politician will go, oh, the kids want this. This is good for the country. This is good for the economy. We should be doing this for a lot of reasons. So our kids can be competitive in the economy when they graduate from high school and then go on to college. And so I put in a bunch of bills like that. On a more funny front, I put in a puppy bill to help puppies. Once it was called Puppers, and I had Lara Trump came down and helped me put in this pupper bill to help out puppies. And that made it through. And so that was a lighter bill.
I saw a like a benefit she had for that actually recently.
Yep, right.
And so anything that anybody brings to a national representative that's in Washington, D.C., it needs to be a bill that's going to affect the whole country. So let's just say if you want something that will build a recreation center in your neighborhood, that's not going to be for you. If someone feels that literacy in this country must be addressed, or the $1 trillion debt, not even the $1 trillion debt, the $1 trillion interest rate on our debt must be addressed. Because you can't get a bill through there. What's the difference between you hear about this, and I guess I'll let this be my last question. I really want to walk through a bill, so I hope my comrades will ask you about what the next step is after you take it into Congress. But what's the difference in oh gosh, let me get my train of thought back. In a bill that benefits your state, and it seems to me that in a bill that is for the whole nation, because it seems to me that in order to get a bill passed in Washington, D.C., let's say you're in Virginia, it can't just be something that helps Virginia. And yet you hear about these congressmen and senators who do a lot for their state on a national level. So I'm a little bit confused about that. So let's say you want something for Virginia, but it's got to benefit the whole state if you want every congressmember from all the other states to vote for it. So how does that work?
Well, let me just tell the young people, we used to have a system that was called federalism, right? And so the original Constitution under We the People, we wanted everyone to do everything at the local level as much as you could. If you can't solve it there, then it goes to your state level. And if they can't solve it there, like national defense, then it goes to the nation. Unfortunately, we don't have that anymore. Everybody has found it, all the lobbyists have found it very efficient, right? You can spend $1 million on lobbyists and get $1 billion windfall. That's quite an investment, right? And so what you said has a logic to it, but you can ask for a local bridge, and you can get your congressman to add a local bridge into a budget code or whatever, into a bill, and you can stick up for your people that way. I'm not in love with that way, But there's a lot of that, right? And there's all sorts of terms for that. But people make deals, and congressmen will kind of be given almost a certain amount of money to spend per congressman on their state. And so that's the way the system is right now. I think your logic is right in that you, at the federal level, you probably want to put in bills that are good for the country as a whole, and at the state level. But the state level budgets are, just teeny in comparison with our $7 trillion U.S. federal budget, right? The state budgets are, 100 billion or something on that order, right? And so you just, the difference is staggering. And that's why I brought up, the idea of federalism is we're in trouble. Your generation's in trouble. If we keep doing everything at the federal level, the Congress people get elected for saying yes. And so it's very hard for them to say, eat your spinach. We cannot spend anymore. If that's your philosophy, and that's my philosophy, it's hard to stay up in what they call the swamp.
Yeah, so American people really have to be willing to make the sacrifices to save the country in the long run. Well, okay, yeah, it's just interesting because I hear that like the representative from Michigan, so to speak, or Indiana or whatever, just got a new plant there for the automobile industry. And so that's not really benefiting the whole nation, but it benefited his state. So I was just curious how that works. In closing here, and I've got to toss. Is that what you call pork or dog ear? Where people go in and say, I'll vote for this bill, but I want this bridge or I want this auto plant. Is that how it works?
Pork barrel spending. There used to be more of it. There's kind of been a movement away from that pork barrel specific type of agreements, but it still happens, right? We had the bridge to nowhere. You remember that? There's just huge room for abuse when everybody starts arguing in the billions of dollars for this project versus this project. Who's analyzed it? And, as an economist, I'll just throw in the idea that the economy hasn't analyzed that, right? This is all political, right? And so in a free market system, the price system is usually used to assess the benefit of something. If you're willing to buy something, that's kind of evidence that it's of value. Whereas if it's just me trying to go get something politically because I want it and I got power and I got friends with power, you can see why we're in a mess right now. So that's what the young people are going to have to sort out.
Yeah, really interesting. So really the national government in DC should just stick with national issues. And if you want a new power plant, if you want a new, automobile power, industry or plant in your state, then it should really be done on a local level. It should be done on a state level, not local, but state level.
And it should apply to things that the private sector can't do, in my view, right? An automobile plant, even Elon Musk now, right? The genius engineer, even he's saying, I can get by without the government. He got by with a $2 billion plant in China and huge green subsidies to get himself moving, but he thinks he can survive without it. And so, firm behavior in particular is, we got these magnificent 7 firms right now. 7 firms own about, 40-45% of the stock market, the S&P 500. 7 firms, right? Those 7 firms are bigger than any European market all combined. And so that in economics, monopolies, et cetera, that they're scary for several reasons, but that's another lecture for another day.
Yeah, true. So true. We could talk forever, but see, that's the problem. The federal government got involved in private industry by giving them money and subsidizing them. And the minute they did that, the federal government became involved in private industry, and then it became involved in local and state issues. And so the government just should have kept its hands out of all that, I guess.
And once you let one firm in, you got to let everybody else in, right? And then everybody goes up there.
Yeah, subsidized, like the railroad industries were subsidized. That private industries were subsidized by the government, and then you've got that. And then you get the regulations, and they're like, well, we don't want this regulations. And like, well, you took the government's money, even though I don't believe in regulations, so it's a real tricky thing where the Uncle Sam gets a lot of power because of that. Money is power. All right, I'm going to toss to Jewel. Okay, thanks so much. Thanks.
You bet. Thanks, Janine.
All right, thank you. Yes, this is Jewel Gilbert with Constituting America, And quickly, could you just answer the question that Janine didn't get to ask, which was, so what's next once that bill, at the progression of the bill that you were up to before Janine had to pass? So before the vote.
Yeah. So the first step, the most important step, is getting your Congress member to support your idea and start drafting a bill. If they do that, there's a pretty good chance it's going to move on through their office, or they wouldn't have taken it because they know this takes time, right? They have to draft that bill, and then they'll kind of check it out with their colleagues to make sure they're, on okay territory. And then it goes up to committee, and then it goes from committee to the entire House of Representatives. And then if it passes the entire House of Representatives, it goes over to the entire Senate. And bounces off of their committee structure. And then if it gets voted yes there, then it goes up to the president to get signed. And if the president signs it, your bill is now law.
Awesome. So how does the bill become admitted to a committee?
The member just presents the idea to the committee, and you get co-signers. You have a kind of a one-page summary, suffices most of the time. And this is a problem, right? A lot of times lawmakers don't know what they're signing, and there's just thousands of bills circulating at the same time, right? So your colleague will come up, hey, will you sign on to my bill? Yeah, what's it do? Well, it does this. And then you read over a summary paragraph or page and say, yeah, that's a no-brainer. I'll do it. But if it's controversial, or it could hit you politically, you say, let me check. And then let me check means I'm probably not going to get back with you. Right. So that's kind of the way it rolls.
So then can any member ask any committee to look at their bill to be able to make it out of that committee? Or how does
well, you just go find one of your friends or colleagues that's on that committee and say, hey, would you put this in for? Would you put this in, run it through your staff?
And is there a hard and fast rule that that binds certain bills to certain committees? What about a bill that may straddle two committees, or is part of the bill writing process to write it to fit into a committee?
Yeah, you kind of got to do it. There's a few exceptions, and it gets very complex. But I think you saw recently up in DC, with RFK Jr., right? When he was up for confirmation to be Secretary of Health, the Health Committee didn't handle it. The Commerce Committee did. And everybody kind of just acknowledges that's kind of an anomaly. And it's probably because healthcare is 3 times bigger than the defense budget all in, right? So it's got such massive implications for spending that I don't know how long ago that happened, but they probably shoved it over into Commerce just as a check to make sure someone's not bankrupt in the country. And so that was an example there. But yeah, you do your homework ahead of time, and the congressman or woman, truthfully, isn't going to take on too many bills, right? Because their staff time, you can only handle, I don't want to make up a number, 10 bills at a time or something like that. I mean, after that, you're going to lose your focus and you're going to lose your concentration trying to push those bills through.
How many bills are presented not for political purposes, as far as a stunt where you want them to fail, but how many bills are presented stumped for that the congressman really believes may pass and they don't?
Right. That's a good question. You're young. I don't want to get too cynical yet. I want to be the smaller bills, whatever. The bigger bills, there's a lot of posturing, right? If budget bill, like, for example, the bigger the idea that you young people have, balanced budget amendment. They can't save $100 billion right now, much less, what it would take to balance a budget right now? $2 trillion. We're running $2 trillion deficits. So if you're saying when you run on that, are they being realistic, or they know they're just posing and posturing? And the answer is they're posing and posturing. Same with term limits. Do you think that members of Congress who spend their whole life making donor calls and suffer and torture and the pain it inflicts on your family, you think they're going to vote for a bill to term limit themselves after the pain they go through? Right. And they should term limit you. You're right to want that. But those are kind of posturing poser bills, the giant ones that sound great, but they have very low probability of passing.
And then, as far as with you with an economic background, is there a bill that you would be? Is there a type of bill that you would want Congress to be entertaining, that you would want to be being worked on right now to help us in where we're at right now economically, looking at the situation that you detailed with, we may be at $50 trillion debt at the time that we're not even too old. And with a government which is now for this century, this millennia, not been able to rein itself in. Is there a type of, do you think that the places for Congress to be workshopping a solution to this? And are there any types of bills that you think would work for that could actually pass?
Right now, the Republicans have the House and the Senate and the White House, and the Supreme Court is iffy on some stuff. And the presidency, right? So they got all three branches somewhat. And so now is the time, to realign government. To your big question there is, the original Constitution, if it wasn't in there, it's unconstitutional. And right now we got a $7 trillion budget with secretaries that run the world, right, through bureaucracies. All of that originally would have been considered unconstitutional. I got, very conservative friends who say that's unconstitutional. And today, a lot of it is not unconstitutional because there's what's called precedent, right? That it's been in place for so long that, roughly speaking, it gains some constitutional standing if the Supreme Court has let it fly, right? If they've made decisions on the basis that those institutions are in place. But the original founding logic was brilliant, right? They wanted a government that remained for the people. And right now you have a lot of unelected folks making huge decisions. And so if you're serious about the realignment of government, you can go look up the Chevron case and read about that. That one kind of really took a step against the unelected bureaucrats and put a lot of power back to the House of Representatives to be specific and state what power they have to address certain issues. And then after realigning a logical government, then yes, everything would be economic. We're bankrupt and beyond bankrupt, and we're going to have a very hard time digging our way out. You'll hear a lot of Republicans say we're just going to do a tax cut and we'll grow our way out of it. It's not true. Just go plug in a growth rate of 5% and see how long it takes you to grow out of a $50 trillion debt pile. And do that math. So then you're not guessing. You're not just making political pablum statements, but go look up what your generation will have to do in order to get out of that debt burden and in order to save the entitlement program, Social Security and Medicare. No one's telling you you're going to lose those, right? Because they're just voting for more and more spending. And they all say, oh, we love the kids, but that ain't what love looks like to me.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. I'm going to pass on to Wyatt and appreciate your awesome answers.
Thank you. Thank you, brother.
Yes, hello. This is Wyatt Hensley.
Wyatt, hey.
Thank you for being on here today. Just got a few quick questions for you. So
Sure.
You had briefly mentioned this, but I was wondering if you could kind of expand on it. So the role of the sponsor as well as the co-sponsors, how does one become a co-sponsor of the bill? Do they have any specific duties?
Not really duties. They're just putting their name on it. And so if you run into trouble, they're there with you. If it's good, they get the credit. And if it's bad, they're going to get tanked. But that's the sheet when you're on the House floor. That's where a lot of that takes place. You're walking around to your friends and colleagues and like-minded people and saying, hey, will you sign on as a co-sponsor to my bill? And it, if you get 20, 30, 40 names, then that's a pretty good showing, and you can kind of move on.
Yeah. So you were also talking about too the bills they can originate either in the Senate or the House, but there are a few exceptions. I was wondering if you could elaborate on that, and why are there exceptions of why some bills have to originate in the House?
I don't even know. Name an exception so
Well,
I can be specific.
if I'm not mistaken, isn't like money bills dealing with the budget, don't they have to originate in the House?
Yes,
Or
that's right. Yeah, and what's the reason for that? I don't know, probably just because with the huge, you see the budget bills, all right, we're not passing any budgets, right? It's supposed to be 12 appropriations bills, and the House hasn't passed one, in I don't know how many decades. And so the reasoning there is probably, can you imagine if you had the House starting with 12 separate bills and just a mess, and the Senate at the same time writing 12 appropriations bills and they don't overlap, and the complexity is just a nightmare. It's already a nightmare, right? So that there's usually some historic reason for that. So on the budget, I'm sure that's probably the original logic.
Yeah, that, like I said, completely makes sense. What step of the legislative process usually takes the longest?
That's a good question. You get the idea, write up the bill. That doesn't take too long. You go to committee. Probably getting that committee to okay it. Once you get your committee to okay it, the little secret is the speaker is kind of over everything. They have too much power, in my opinion. And so really the chairs the chair of the budget committee or whatever, they know their latitude under the speaker, right? So if you get it through your chair of the committee, basically it means you got the speaker on board, and then it goes through the House. And then if you got the speaker on board, that's a hint to the Senate that it makes sense somewhat, and they'll give it a hearing.
You're saying the speaker has too much power. What does the speaker have over the committee chairs in the committees?
There's one answer to everything, and I say in this whole hour, the answer is power, right? So they have power. They can hand out 10 million for your next election, or withhold 10 million and you will lose, right? They can put you on the A committees where you can raise $10 million in addition to what they give you, or they can put you on C committees where you can't raise any money. And so basically they hold your existence, your survival as a member in their hands.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean,
That's what they don't tell you in the textbook.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people obviously know that the speaker is a powerful position. I mean, it's
huge.
I mean, it's literally after the vice president in the line of presidential succession, but
and more powerful than the VP by far.
Yeah, that's definitely very true. So during your time as a congressman, what was something that you had learned about the legislative process that you hadn't known previously?
Well, the biggest thing, I was always amazed by the lobbyists. These young 30-year-old lobbyists knew everything. I was stunned. They knew all the secrets of who's who and who's writing what in the Pablum papers, and I mean the intricacies of bills. I learned they really are sharp cookies. I'm just more of a boring meat and potatoes principled guy, right? You do the right thing, blah blah blah. And you pay a price in DC for that, right? If you don't know the intricacies of the politics behind it. And then I also learned, what I said earlier, that every bill, every good idea has a constituency on the other side as well, right? So if you look at tariffs right now, right? If you raise the price of one thing, you make it less attractive, right? So we're raising the price on imports, right? So we don't get as many, we want to balance the trade balance. And so you're hurting them and you're helping us to export. But that's just kind of a good economic example. Anytime you tax anything, right? You're raising the tax on one group. It's going to help one group and it's going to hurt one group. And so I always just thought in terms of what's optimal for the country, and made my decisions that way. But boy, you get whacked, right, by special interests who are powerful. If they have, like the list idea, right? If you take on a group that's got massive power, you're in big trouble, no matter how good your idea is for the country.
And where are the lobbyists and which part of the process? Are they in the entire process of the legislative process, or?
Yes, they own every piece of the puzzle. I'm exaggerating slightly, but yes, they're behind the scenes in everything. They're in the press, they're in the Congress, they're in the nonprofits, they're in everything. And it, like I said earlier, it's efficient, right? If you hire a lobbyist for $1 million and you save $100 million, you just made 100x return on your investment, right? For hiring a lobbyist for $1 million. So what sounds outrageous is a great investment. But this is a problem because we, the people, you can't do that, right? You can't have that influence. And so that's a problem, right? When that big money starts replacing you, putting in your idea to a congressman, you won't get a hearing individually, but their lobbyists will. For a giant firm, they can walk into the office and kick you out in a minute and they'll be sitting there for a half hour, right? So you young people better figure out how to end that.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Something that doesn't really get talked about a whole lot.
Nope.
So another part of the legislative process was talking about the presidents. If they sign it, it becomes law, but if they don't sign it,
Right.
if you could talk about some of the options, because there's more than one different type of veto too that they could use, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, no, that's right. Right now we're running into it with the budget, right? So ordinarily, if the president vetoes it, I think it takes 2/3 of the Senate to override a veto, something like that. And then there's an exception with a budget. You can do what's called budget reconciliation. And there you only need 51 votes in the Senate. But you do have to have the president, so he can still veto. And then in that case, I'm not sure what the number is to override. That'd be an interesting question.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Well, I am about to run out of time, so I'll just go ahead and hand it back over to Kathy. Thank you so much again.
Good. You bet. Thank you, brother. Appreciate the question. Very good questions.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Wyatt and Jewel and Janine. And this has been a fascinating episode, Dave. We really appreciate you being on. And,
Right.
when you said the thing about when Wyatt asked the question about which part of the legislative process takes the longest, and you said committee, from my experience on the Hill, I would agree with that, because I remember so many times my boss would put bills in, they would get assigned to a certain committee, and the biggest challenge would be to get the committee to act on the bill.
Yeah. Right.
Wait and hope and
Yep.
talk to people and pray.
Right.
And sometimes it would, you go a whole Congress and the committee wouldn't act on it. And again,
Yep.
I think it's the leadership a lot of times that drives out on which
Yep.
bills the committees actually act on and which ones they don't. And it's got to get out of committee before it goes on to the next thing. So
Exactly.
I'm going to put a plug in for our episode next week, because we are going to be talking in depth about committees with a former committee staff director and someone who's currently a senior advisor to Speaker Johnson. So
Wow. Good.
yeah, so
They're very smart people, by the way, highly respected on the Hill.
Yeah. So, but we want to give a shout out to a few of our students who are watching today. Kenyon Wanouse is watching. Sharon and Connor Cummings are watching. And if you're a student and you'd like a shout out before the end of the show, be sure and put your name in our Q&A and we'll give you a shout out as well. So we want to thank teachers and classrooms who are watching today. We also want to thank our listeners on Las Vegas's KKVV 1060 AM on your radio dial. KKVV airs these podcasts at 6 p.m. on Monday evening, 6 p.m. Pacific. So thank you to our Las Vegas listeners who listen to Constituting America's Constitutional Chats podcast. So going to our audience questions, Terry Rose asks a really interesting question. Do you believe our representatives should vote their conscience or vote on behalf of their constituents, or how do you balance that?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's no technical right answer to that thing. I would say you should vote your conscience. And when you run, I mean, you're running on your conscience, your positions. You're conveying your personality to the folks and saying, "I'm going to be your representative if you elect me." And so that I'd kind of sway over to the follow your conscience thing.
Well, thank you. And then Joe Buford asks, what can you do if you live in an area where you have a great idea that the prevailing party would oppose and your rep will not support it? And he gives a couple of examples. I'm not familiar with these, but overturning Reynolds versus Sims or re-enfranchising rural areas.
Yeah.
Generally, are there other ways that you could get your bill considered?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And yeah, it's the most important question because politics is downstream from culture. And so if things aren't right and the country is not functioning and we're not doing the right things, you need to educate the populace. And unfortunately, our K-12 system, right, is not doing a great job. That's why we need shows like this. Our kids are not coming out of high school knowing how to take part and do civics properly. And so, yeah, you need to, education is just sadly lacking right now, and you need to change the culture. And don't lose track of that, right? This country was made. Tocqueville came over here and said that very clear. I'm just shocked at the religious nature of these people. If they got a problem, they go out and build a church together. They build a school together. They build a bridge together. They just go do it, and very educated about their processes. And so that we missed that. I missed that. So that's a great question.
Well, thank you. And then I have someone who texted a question in. She says, I've been reading and teaching the Constitution for 25 years, and based on what I'm hearing, are we not going to return to original intent? Article 1, Section 8 has 17 enumerated powers. Is that still the constitutional standard? So don't we need educated electorate to know these limits and hold their federal congressmen and federal senators accountable to vote in a constitutional manner?
Yeah, no, great question. I alluded to that. I didn't use the term, the enumerated powers. Anything that's not enumerated, they don't have. Well, I'm very sorry to tell you because you sound like a person with a big heart that's very honest intellectually, but we're so far past that. There's a million enumerated powers now in law. We've blown up the Constitution. We've blown past it. We have unelected bureaucrats running things. We have a debt pile that's so enormous. The founders would just be stunned. I mean, can you imagine a George Washington or a Jefferson seeing what we've done to their Constitution that they fought so hard for? And they were all scared, right? There was the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. That was the whole debate. They were scared of the federal government taking control. Well, they got control. The states don't do anything anymore. Unfortunately, in the localities, it's down to, just kind of local issues and smaller funding streams. So it's not good for we the people. And so, great question. Boy, I wish you educate the people, get the culture back to that standard. That's where the standard clearly should be, in my view.
And Andrew K echoes that in our audience. Andrew says, isn't it true that the founders presumed that the electorate constituency would be both educated and informed? And to what degree has that presumption been eroded by the lack of civics education today?
Yeah, well, I'll just throw in one other term from Ben Franklin: educated, informed, and moral. And so morality, I could go on for the next, I taught it, for 20 years. But can you please tell me what ethics we follow? Can you please tell me what ethics we teach in K-12? I'm dying to know. I'm being cynical, but we don't teach any ethical system. I got Plato and Aristotle sitting right there. The whole question of what is good. And we said, well, all you got to do is be a good person. Well, that begs the question. You haven't told me what good is yet. What is it to be good? And it's not a simple question. It's been 2,400 years since old brother Plato raised it. And it's a great dialogue. And so get on it. And if your local schools are not teaching kids what good is, I don't know how in the world they can make political decisions that are good.
Yeah, very much so. And And Stephen, Dave, this may vary from speaker to speaker.
Yeah.
But Stephen Murray asks, is it not the case that nothing gets on the legislative calendar for a floor vote without the speaker's okay?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct.
Okay.
And your ability, if you're out with a speaker, you don't get to put a bill in the hopper, by the way. I mean, you can put it in the hopper, but it ain't going to be recognized. So the speaker or your chairman of a committee or whatever, if you're in the doghouse because you're not behaving on other issues, they won't let you put a bill in on another issue, which is not the proper, founding ideal.
Okay. And then Lewis White says, I believe the reason for spending to originate in the House is because before the 17th Amendment, it was the people's house and the Senate represented the states.
Oh, very good. Very good. There's a scholar. I
Yeah.
buy that one. I buy it. Makes sense.
Thank you, Lewis. So, and then Andrew K has one other question. To what degree does the intense partisanship polarity of today's political situation prevent citizens from being able to interact with their representatives as you've suggested? Does reality defeat theory?
Oh, yeah, to a large extent, we're just in a brawl right now. And I don't want to get into it, but there's two philosophies fighting right now that I don't know if they can be reconciled logically. The old liberals, I used to be a conservative on a liberal faculty. We'd argue like cats and dogs, but we could reconcile through a thing called human reason. And reason was somewhat recognized in basic economics and the data. These days, you have philosophical schools that can't even agree what if the data is true or what true means. And so it's so heightened and stark right now. Yeah, you basically got to play team ball right now, I think. If you're not on a team, your ideas aren't going to move forward.
Well, thank you for that. And there's still hope, I think.
Yeah. Oh, always change the culture.
Definitely, definitely. So we're getting right near the top of the hour, and we just want to thank you so much for being on with us today and for really for your emphasis on how important it is that we, the people, are both educated and that we interact with our representatives and that we make sure we're taking our ideas to our representatives. And we definitely want to thank you for the inspiration that you gave our younger generation watching. And I just want to toss it back to Wyatt and Jewel real quick to see if y'all have any parting comments.
Yeah, I'll go first. I mean, like you said, the big emphasis on getting young people involved. I know a lot of even my friends too. It's unfortunate that they aren't aware of the legislative process and how they can be involved too, because sometimes it feels so distant from us. Like, oh, that's all the way up in DC. We're not gonna like, what do we have that could impact it? But really, I mean, they are our representatives. They need to listen to us, and so definitely putting that emphasis on getting young kids involved and made aware of this process is something that's truly great. So thank you again.
Yeah. And DC isn't too far from you when it comes to be tax time. They'll find your wallet real quick.
Exactly. Thank you for the great show. I would like to tell all of our listeners that also, if you're ever a student in your life that needs any support and has some idea that they'll need you to step up in the first, if you do that for them, then they will continue to believe in that. But if they don't find that support, then they may never try again. And that's why we love what we do. You do. But anyone listening, you can be that for a student.
Yep. Amen. Amen. Very well. Very well said.
So thank you so much, Congressman. We're so honored to have you today. And we want to thank all of our listeners and for all of your great questions and participation. And we hope that y'all will come back and join us next week on Tuesday, March 18th at 2 p.m. Eastern for our next episode. We're going to really be talking about committees and the committee structure. So thank y'all so much.
Thanks, Kathy.
Okay, thank you. Bye.